Today we're working on a 2014 Honda Odyssey 3.5 VTEC. A lot of the Honda vehicles have this engine. A lot of them have the same problem, rattle. So we're going to be doing a timing belt and water pump today and some spark plugs, but hoping that the timing is the source of the rattle noise. So let's get started. First up, it's a 22 millimeter for the wheel removal. Next, we're going to begin removing a bunch of these little clips. You might have to remove screws and a little bolt here, but we're going to try and peel this plastic back out of the way. Actually, it's pretty soft. I might be able to just remove a couple of them and fold it back to the inside. We'll see. Most of these are going to be the style that you pop the center out with a trim tool and then go ahead and pull the whole plug out. Now, I took the top and these first two bottom ones out, and rather than go around and take the rest of this fender well out, I was going to peel it up above the brake rotor, but I think I'm just going to put a bungee cord in here and hold this back out of the way, because what we're trying to gain access to is the crank pulley right there and the lower timing cover, which I think we can get with this access here. So the bungee strap I've got hooked clear up on the edge of a support that's by the radiator, and then there's a hole underneath here on this plastic that I stuck it through, and that gives us this look right at the crank pulley. The first thing we got to do is line up the mark on the crank pulley for top dead center. The marks that you're trying to line up are this white paint mark and the pointer. See that triangle piece on the timing cover? So you want this white paint mark to go all the way around and line up straight with that pointer. Then we'll go check out the camshaft on the front side of the engine. There's an access hole that you can look through and make sure that that timing mark is lined up as well. I've got a 3/4 inch socket with a couple of extensions on this ratchet to be able to turn that crank pulley. It's hard camera angle to get, but I'm pretty sure I've got the mark and the paint mark lined up. And we'll go to the top side and check out the camshaft mark. Can remove the engine cover if you want. For me, it might help a little more light get in here, so that's why I'm doing it. Not necessarily for access. Right here on this upper cover is where you're going to find a rubber plug that you can pull out, and this should have your camshaft timing mark. And it is not quite lined up. Not the best lighting here, but you can see that the timing mark on the cover is just a little to the left of the mark on the pulley there. There's a little better light right there. So I rotated the crankshaft another full rotation, 360, and just watch the top mark to get these lined up. Now I'm going to go down and see where the crankshaft mark is in relation to that timing mark. And it's definitely short, so it's not lined up with that timing mark. So looks like there's a little bit of jump timing. Hopefully there's not bent valves in this motor. I'm going to put a 14 millimeter on the belt tensioner up here, pull down on that and remove the belt. Next, you want to support the engine with a block of wood under the oil pan, just to take the weight off so that you can remove the upper half of this engine mount. So you got two, looks like 14 millimeter bolts here, plus this little ground strap, and then there's a through bolt that also, oh, that one looks bigger, maybe a 17 or something, but that's the bracket we need to take off next. The ground strap bolt looks like, yep, it's a 10 millimeter. So you can kind of see the angle I need to get to from the front. This one's going to be a little difficult because the motor mount appears to be just completely trashed. It is loose and flopping around, but you can see right through that hole. I got my 17 millimeter socket on the bolt. The backside does not have a nut. It just goes into the housing of the motor mount. So at least I don't have to try to get two things on it, but not sure how much ratchet space I'll have to get this out. Okay, for a little bit of access, I depressed this tab right here, pulled the power steering reservoir up and just moved it out of the way. You want to be careful how far you tilt it. You can see my fluid level right there, so it doesn't start coming out the cap. Then I had to put one bolt back in over here in order to hold that motor mount still so I could get my ratchet on this bolt right down here and get it loose to pull it out, because otherwise it wasn't holding still enough with that flopping around. So now I'll remove that other bolt. Again, the long one was a 17 and those other two are 14s. A couple of wire harness clips here that you gotta pop out, I believe, in order to lift this bracket up and out of there, because the power steering pump is in the way for it coming up on that side, and the wire harness is kind of blocking it from coming up on this side. Okay, wire harness loose here, just popped up out of the clip. I was able to get enough clearance to get that bracket up and out. Next, we're going to remove the belt tensioner in order to get access to all the bolts on the camshaft cover, the upper timing cover they call it. This has to be out of the way. This is a 14 millimeter. I was running out of room with my 1/2-inch drive ratchet as the bolt was backing out. So I switched to a wrench. After you get the center one loose, then there's a small 12 millimeter one right here. After the 12 millimeters out, you should be able to just pick it up. Turn it kind of sideways to get it out of there. Next, we're going to take the crank pulley bolt out. So I went to O'Reilly's and rented the Acura Honda special, I think it's 55 millimeter tool here. Put my 1/2-inch drive breakover bar in that to hold it. I'm going to line things up where I can just put my foot up against the frame and hold that. At the same time, pull up on my 4-foot cheater pipe out here on my 1/2-inch drive ratchet. It's on a couple extensions and a 3/4 inch socket. So a lot to say there, but that crank bolt is on tighter than my electric impact will pull off. So this is what I'm going to do. All right, so we finally got that bolt out. That was a chore. And we'll see if the crank pulley will wiggle off here. I see a little bit of, or feel a little bit of movement in it, so usually don't need to use a puller on these. Let's see if I can wiggle it loose in a little bit. Yeah, I just got it slipped off in there. Just had to get both hands on it. I'm going to leave that keyway in there for now. It's very important to maintain the location of that crankshaft. Okay, next we're going to take off the upper timing covers from each camshaft, and I'm going to attempt to show you where the bolts are here. There's one there, number 2's there, number 3's there, and then 4 and 5 are on the bottom. One of them is recessed in this hole right here, and the other one is down underneath this corner. So there's essentially 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. just gonna use a 1/4-inch drive ratchet with a 10mm socket on it. After you get all 5 bolts out, that cover should just come forward, lift up out of there. Not much slack in that belt. On the rear cover, there's a wire that goes through like a retainer clip all the way around the back side here. So you gotta pull that out first, and then you should be able to pop that. Kind of got to lift up at the same time, so got to get that wire harness on the other side of it. Be able to work it out of there. I'm gonna have to set the phone down so I can use 2 hands to push the wire harness around the back and then pry this out. Next, we're gonna remove the lower timing cover. Looks like there's 7 bolts maybe. 1 up here on the top right, 1 on the middle right, 3rd one's bottom right, 4th one's bottom left, middle left, right up in the center, and then there's 1 clear up here in the corner. I think there's 7 bolts. They're all 10mm, so we'll get those out next. Once you get all those timing cover bolts out, should be able to just pop it off of there and slide it down. It does have a gasket on it, so sometimes those get a little stuck. So one of the first things I notice when getting that cover off is how much slack is in the side opposite of the tensioner. So this pulley right here is probably shot. I don't believe I should be able to move that with my finger, so there's a lot of slop in this side of the belt. Next up, we're going to start removing the bolts for this engine mount. So you can get to the one here from the bottom. Another one right on the back side of my finger here, and then there's one inside this bracket itself. Then there's one on top I'll show you in a second. But you get the ones you can get from the bottom, and there's a little bit of work from the top. You gotta move the PCM out of the way and take the other half of the engine mount that's still connected to the car off, so these bolts can back out. So this is the mount that we need to take off next, and the bolts need to come out backwards here. Well, they're going to run right into this isolator, the part of the engine mount that's still on the car. It's held on by 3 bolts, 1 here, 1 on the back side right there, and then the 3rd one is difficult to get to. It's down underneath here. So we will be taking loose the PCM bracket that holds this in place. I'm going to try to do it without taking the PCM loose, which is not a big deal. It's only 3 bolts, 1 here, 1 here in the corner, and 1 down beneath plug number 1 and 2. But there are 1, 2, 3, and then 2 down below, 1 right there, and 1 right there. Those 5 10mm bolts hold the PCM bracket. And if I can get it loose and we can pull the whole thing up out of the way far enough, then we'll get that 3rd 17mm of the engine bracket, or the isolator. So we'll start with all that before we take the engine mount off. The 3 on top, easy to get to, obviously. And then the 2 down below, I'm going to put on a 18-inch extension with my 1/4-inch drive. First one's kind of down at this front angle. You might have to move your power steering hoses or reservoir around just a little bit in order to get on that one. Second one down below is back over the top of that isolator mount. On both of these, I'll use a telescoping magnet to stick down there and make sure the bolt doesn't fall. Just stick that down there right next to it and it'll keep it from falling. Get all three of those top ones removed, and then this is now loose. You see the bolt we're trying to get to down there. Yeah, right there. So I can probably get it with a universal joint. If not, I can take these 3 bolts of the PCM out and then it will separate from the bracket, and you can kind of move them in 2 different directions. I know you can get to it. I'll just go ahead and do that way. It'll be a little bit easier to access the bolt. And got the one on the right. On the left. And the one down underneath in between plug number 1 and plug number 2. Break them loose, and I usually just use the socket with my fingers to move them the rest of the way. So pull those 3 out, and then that PCM will be separate from the bracket. All right, now you can move this forward. And this kind of forward and at an angle. And now you can get to that bolt straight on, 17 millimeter. Take that one out first. We got about a 12-inch extension on there. That one comes out, we're going to use our telescoping magnet to get it out as well. Next, we'll move on to that front one. Going to get a little longer extension. For the bolt back right there on the back side, the procedure calls for you to take the fuse box and everything out of here, but I can get to it with a universal joint on my 17 millimeter with that long extension. I can reach down right in front of the power steering pump and get right on it. So all 3 of those bolts are out. You should just be able to move your power steering reservoir up out of the way and work that engine mount, that isolator mount, up through here. We'll have to take it loose from the wire harness right here, so you can either pop it out of the clips or you can undo the 10 millimeter bolt that's right there on top of it, and then that bracket will stay in the car. Well, the less I have to mess with plastic retainer clips on wire harnesses, the better, because a lot of times they break. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this 10 millimeter that's holding that bracket to the isolator. All right, now that isolator should be all loose. pull it up out of there. All right, now we'll work on getting that engine mount that's still attached to the motor off. 14mm bolts, and then there will be a small one on top, I believe. Back up in here. Get some light in there. Yeah, see the bracket coming down from the top. So I'm going to attempt to get in there with a wrench so I don't have to take the power steering pump off, but might have to take the pump loose just to get it out of the way of that one bolt right there in that little bracket. So the first one we're just on with the 3/8 drive ratchet, 14mm socket. It was pretty tight. There is probably enough room to get a 1/2" drive ratchet in there if you need to. Second one will move back a little bit. Also pretty tight. Third one is down towards the bottom, and I could get it from underneath the car if I wanted to, but I think I can reach it from right here, so I'll spare you the time on video it takes to get these three out. It's going to take a little bit, but you can see the mount's already a little bit loose. So I'll give you a look at those two bolts and where they exit on the top. Watch how far that comes out. So it's a pretty significant bolt. That's why the isolator has to be moved out of the way. And that second one on the top is pretty much the same way. The third bolt down below appears to have some Loctite on it, and it's a shorter bolt, so make sure you remember the orientation of those. So I'm not going to get this part on camera because my hand ends up blocking all the camera views, but with the light shining from the front there, you can look right through the power steering pulley and see that. I believe it's a 10mm bolt that I'm trying to get on. So I've got room to get a wrench up underneath here. And as long as I can have enough room to turn, or enough, if the head's sticking up far enough to get the box end on, it'll be great. If it's not, then I'm gonna have to use the open end. Well, turns out I can't get in there with a wrench either, so I am gonna take the power steering pump loose. It's 3 bolts, 12mm, one there, and one underneath. All 3 of those bolts are the same size on the power steering pump, and then you just move it forward so that you can get access to that bolt below. I'll get better light on it in a second. So that one right there, right here, 10mm, that's what we're trying to get off, so the engine mount will be loose. So as soon as you take that small bolt out, this mount piece is going to want to fall down, so kind of got to be ready. Catch it and fish it up out of here. Here's our new parts kit. So we've got the water pump, timing belt, and the pulleys. Should also be the tensioner. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the guard on the bottom here around the belt. Should be a couple 10mm nuts here. And then we can take off the shield. Then we're going to remove the pulleys, both on the right and the left, and the tensioner here. Pulleys are 14mm, I believe, and the tensioner should be 10s. Those two 10mm nuts off. Should be able to slide this off. I took off the idler pulley on the right first, just because it's closer. 14mm, and it was on there extremely tight. Next, I'm gonna take the tensioner off, which should be two 10mm bolts. All right, I decided I'm gonna leave the old tensioner on for now because this actually rests right on it. So rather than, the procedure tells you to take a battery, hold down that long piece of threaded material and thread through here to where it touches this, and it kind of gives you, I'm guessing, just a positive location of where this adjustable pulley needs to be. But I'm going to use the old tensioner because it appears to be worn out to be the reference point of where that needs to set, so I can install the new adjustable pulley. After I get the water pump on, I'll install that new adjustable pulley and let it rest against this worn out tensioner, and we'll just kind of see where we're at. And then I'll install the new tensioner, and this will at least be in the relative position. Hope that all makes sense. This pulley here is not on nearly as tight as the idler was. All right, now we can get the old belt out of the way and start removing our water pump bolts. These are just going to be 10mm bolts all the way around that water pump. No, not that one. I'll show you the new pump and we'll count them, but it looks like for the 10mm bolts, it's just going to be 5 of them. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the other 3 are pass-throughs for other components there, the big engine mount. Something else to notice on this vehicle, I'm not sure if it's very visible on camera, is there's a lot of belt debris in here. So the next thing I'm going to do is get a catch pan for the coolant. I did not drain the radiator ahead of this process, so we're going to get a significant amount of coolant coming out of this water pump as we take these 10mm bolts loose. Again, there's 5 of them on the pump right now. So I took 3 bolts out and 2 of them are loose. We'll just try to pry away here a little maybe. And if we get lucky, we'll be able to drain the coolant slower rather than just a full-blown empty. Get the most of it in the pan. A little faster than I would have hoped, but it'll work this way. Here's the old one. Wasn't anything wrong with this one. It's not leaking or anything, but when you're already in here for the timing, you might as well take care of this too. So I've cleaned off the mating surface for the gasket, and I'll dry up that coolant that's a little bit slow dripping still right before I put the pump on. I usually like to have one bolt ready to go kind of in one of the holes as I'm pressing this up against the block, so I can start one pretty quickly. If you try to do it with multiples, a lot of times it'll push them right out of the hole and then drop into your pan of coolant, which I still have down there. So I'm gonna just do one bolt for now, and we'll slowly get it bolted up. All right, I know the camera angle sucks, but I'm not really doing it for the footage more than just the information. The water pump bolts are torqued at 9 foot-pounds or 108 inch-pounds. And really just need to do it in somewhat of an alternating pattern here. So I'm going to start on this lower one, and then I'm going to go diagonally opposite to the upper one. And we're slowly just taking them in, not torquing them to final torque right up front, and kind of get things down snug first. All right, get all 5 of those to 108 inch-pounds. Then your water pump for now is installed. You'll put the through bolts for the engine mount. That'll be the final 3 that help hold that down in the center. So next up, we'll move on to the timing components. One more thing before I start putting timing stuff back in, I will blow the area off with some brake clean, just to clean up that antifreeze that dripped all over the place. Most of the debris from the timing chain, from the water pump down, got washed off from that antifreeze, so probably should have done that first, clean off all that debris before I took the water pump loose, because then potentially I could have reused the antifreeze. But I'm positive now that if I look at it, yeah, there's a ton of stuff floating in it, so not that much came out, I guess, less than a gallon, maybe right around a gallon, so I'll just put new in. All right, we got it all cleaned up with some brake clean. We'll start by checking the timing mark here. It's a little difficult to see, but there is a small indentation right there on that top tooth, right above the keyway. This should be lined up with that arrow on the case back there for the oil pump. So we got this timing mark lined up. I didn't have to move it, it was right where it needed to be. Up top again, we've got timing marks on the front of camshaft pulleys. And the phone's not at a good angle, but you want that mark right on the front of the pulley to be lined up with that mark right on the back of the case there. This is another bad camera angle, but I'm a mechanic, not a cameraman. Can't zoom in any further with this particular device. Well, this is not a good camera angle either, but you can see this is the rear camshaft pulley mark, which is, it's right on that tooth. So you can kind of follow it back and make sure that that tooth is lined up on the timing mark back there on the back cover. First up, we'll put on our adjuster pulley. Again, I left the old tensioner cylinder on until I get this installed, then I'll swap that out. But this one, the bolt is tightened to 228 inch-pounds or 19 foot-pounds. So we'll do this one first, and the next one we'll do the idler pulley, which is on the right side. That one is 33 foot-pounds. All right, before we put the idler pulley on, you may notice that there's a shim that comes with the kit. So this shim is related to a technical service bulletin, bulletin PA006-11. It talks about timing belt noise, chirping noise from the belt rubbing the inside of the crank pulley surface is what it says. So they want to shim the idler pulley out just a little bit. Well, by doing that, they say you gotta recess the engine mount housing just a little bit, and they tell you how much to do it in the service bulletin, but I ground a little down just to create that clearance basically for shimming out the pulley, and that way that there's no rubbing. So next up, we're going to install the idler pulley. The shim goes on the back and the bolt goes right through the middle there. You can point that tab downward. It's got a label on it that says out. That way you know which side of the shim to face outward. So we're ready to put the belt back on, and I'm going to go ahead and install this little guard there because it'll hold the belt on the crank pulley while I'm trying to do the routing, kind of help keep it in place. So next we'll put the belt on, get it on the crank, and then we'll install that little shield. There's what the start of it looks like. So this is just going to hold it on. In the sequence of the belt routing, you're going to go not like that. You got to go around the idler here, and then up around the forward camshaft. So this is the sequence here: crank, idler, forward cam, water pump, rear cam, adjustment pulley. And so you want to go counterclockwise, and the tightness should be as tight as you can get it, no slack until you get to the back side of this cam, and then the slack should be in this last run because the tensioner pushes up on this adjustment pulley to take the slack out. Okay, before I route the belt, I will go ahead and take off this old tensioner. All right, we can install the new tensioner, just don't remove the pin until we're all done with lining up the belt. So there's the proper routing of the belt, and we've got everything torqued. The 10 millimeters on the tensioner go to 9 foot-pounds, which is 108 inch-pounds. And got a little bit of slack here in the belt. This side's tight. I'm going to go ahead and pull that pin out, engage the tensioner. So with the tensioner now engaged, the slack's taken out of this side of the belt. I'm going to go ahead and put the crank bolt back in and rotate this 2 full turns, 2 full crank turns, and check the timing march again. Make sure everything's lined up before we put everything back together. If it's not lined up, then we can take that tensioner back off, remove the belt again, and try a second time. When we take the tensioner off, if you do have to do that, then you can put it in a press and insert this pin back in, and it'll be just like it's reset. Next, you get your washer cleaned up, put that back on. Next, we'll put back on that lower engine mount piece with the 2 long bolts up top, shorter one down below, and I'll clean it off, but we're going to watch for clearance in the area that I ground right here on that idler pulley. First one we'll put in all the way is the top one, that 10 millimeter that was down inside of there. Just a little short one with that bracket. It's a wire harness bracket, and it's a terrible design, but we'll install that first before we tighten down the 3 big 14 millimeter bolts for that engine mount from the front. I've got them inserted already and hand started just to hold it in place, but we'll tighten them down after the small one's in. After you get that engine mount back on the engine, 33 foot-pounds on those 3 bolts. I did throw a little blue Loctite. It had red on it, but I put some blue on the lower bolt. And now I'm going to put the 3 bolts back in. Focus. 3 12 millimeter bolts back in the power steering pump. Then we'll move on and go back to that isolator mount. Next, going to reinstall the isolator. 3 big bolts, 17 millimeter heads, and that small 10 that is for the wire harness bracket right on top. Put the isolator back down there in the general position, and then put that 10 millimeter in the bracket. Go right on top. Tighten that down. I like to put the top bolt in next, which is kind of hard to see down in there, but you'll get lined up. That's the hole you want to line up next. Go ahead and drop the front and the rear bolt. Into position. Trying to focus, but there it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten down with that 1/2" drive ratchet, 17mm. The top. Do the front bolt second, because it doesn't require having that universal joint on it. And then the one in the back, we'll put the universal joint on to get down in there. You can access that right in front of the power steering pulley and right underneath the wire harness. Right there. Next we'll return the PCM bracket. So we got 1, 2, 3 up top and 2 down below, 1 here and 1 on an angle. After you get the PCM bracket tightened up, then you can install your 3 into the PCM. One on the right, one on the left, and one down in between plug number 1 and 2. Next we're going to clean and install the timing covers. So we'll start with the lower. After we clean this, we'll put it on. All of the bolts are 10mm and all of them are torqued to 9 foot-pounds or 108 inch-pounds. After you get all the timing covers on and torqued down, you can put the crank pulley back on. This calls for a torque of 47 foot-pounds and then an additional 60 degrees. So we'll be using that special crank pulley tool to hold it still while we move the additional 60 degrees. Next up, we will reinstall the serpentine tensioner. So you got the 14mm in the middle and that 12mm in the bottom. The way I got the serpentine belt back on was I started around the crank, around the AC, and then I did not go around this idler pulley. I did go around the alternator and around the power steering up top and back around that second idler pulley, or the tensioner pulley, the one that actually moves. So then I pulled down with my 1/2" drive ratchet right here and use my finger to slip this over the idler. And it was pretty easy. Lastly, we're going to reinstall this engine mount before we put our PCM cover and our power steering reservoir back in place. So we're going to start by installing this long bolt just loosely, and then we'll line up these two and we'll attach our ground strap back up, and then we'll torque them all down afterwards. So we've got our through bolt threaded in, just finger tight. And we'll go ahead and put our 2 bolts in the mount to the engine. This lines up pretty well. If it doesn't line up for you, you might have to put your jack and a block of wood back down there and try to get it positioned. But my bolts are threading in on their own without moving it. And next we will run those two 17s down, and then we'll put that ground strap back on with the 10mm. These two here are 40 foot-pounds, and the through bolt is 47 foot-pounds. And the through bolt might be a little tricky to get a torque wrench in there, but the last bolt will just be the 10mm right there on that ground strap. Put your power steering back, put your PCM cover back, and I'm getting ready to do spark plugs, so I'm not going to put the engine cover back, but that's the only thing left to do up top. You also need to put your 3 clips back in this shield, or more if you remove the whole inner fender wheel. Then put your tire back on, and that'd be it for the job, except filling it back up with the coolant and doing a bleed procedure. Then go take it for a drive, see if your noise is gone, make sure it's running all right. If you like today's video, please subscribe to the channel.